Hello. Good evening. Thanks very much for coming. It's Studio 3. My name is Michael Bonner. I'm the Associate Editor of Uncut. This is Miles Showell, who is the mastering genius, whose work we will be talking about and listening to very shortly on the Eno albums. So this is the first new cut of vinyl for these albums since the mid-'80s, so that makes them kind of quite special, I think. But what makes them, I think, even more special is the process, the half-speed mastering process. Miles, what would be amazing is if you could briefly tell us about the history of half-speed mastering.
Sure. Well, it's quite simple. I mean, a record, if you think of the music from the speakers, the sound waves, it's recorded on an LP as a wavy groove. So the size and shape of the groove is directly correspondent to what the music's doing at that point. So let's say, for example, you have some bass. You've got a very slow lateral movement of groove. Goes quite a long way, but it travels quite slowly. Mid-range would be like a guitar or a snare drum or some vocal, much, much faster, but still not too fast. High frequency information like a tambourine or a hi-hat or anything that's very high end moves really fast. So let's say if you had a tambourine, you might have a 12 kilohertz component within that. That's 12,000 air cycles a second. The only way you can cut that into a record is to have the recording stylus vibrate at 12,000 times a second. Otherwise, if it didn't do that, it wouldn't get on the disc and you couldn't play it back. It wouldn't be there. So that's actually quite difficult to persuade this. Just like think of it as a giant, as a tiny chisel into a disc, and it's buzzing around like this. It gets really hot and it gets quite stressed. So if you can slow the whole process down, reduce the music by a factor of 2, and the cutting lathe, the speed of the machine that's actually cutting the disc, all of that difficult to cut high frequency information becomes mid-range, much easier to get on. So the system's not getting pushed to its limits. It's not getting stressed. The system has an amplifier, 600 watts per channel, which feeds 2 little coils, like headphone coils, little coils of wire that vibrate, and they move the stylus that records into the master disc. And that's how records are cut. That's how they work. You have, if you imagine, have you got a pen? Somebody, give us your pen, right? So, this imagine this is the recording stylus and this is the disc. You've got this channel and you've got that channel, or you've got both channels in stereo, or any variation thereof, going into the disc. If you can cut it slower, everything has got twice as long to record that intricate groove. So the amplifiers that are feeding the cutter head, usually you'll find at half speed the cutter head will draw somewhere between 1/4 to 1/3 of the current it needs for doing the same thing at real time. So it's just far easier. So that's why I do it. I mean, it's dreadful to listen to in the studio. You're sitting there hour after hour, and I had a 17-hour day of it on Sunday, and it was... But, well, hopefully you're here when we play the records back. It's worth going through that because it just sounds almost otherworldly. At times I play them and I'm thinking, hang on, is this a record I'm listening to? Because it just does not sound like a record. It's just amazing. It's certainly the most accurate way there is to get a recording onto a disc.
So talk us through the process. Is this...
Your pen,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess you get the master tapes, the original tapes.
Yes.
These are sent to you, and then what happens with these records particularly?
Well, specifically for these albums, we source the best tapes that are around, and have a very, very good machine upstairs. There are no new cutting lathes, there are no new tape machines really anymore, certainly in the professional world. So I have a machine from the late 70s. Made by the Ampex company. It's a great sounding machine. I've got custom heads that I bought for it, and I capture a high resolution digital file, very, very high resolution, through very good digital to analog converters, analog to digital converters, and then it'll go into a workstation and I'll work from there. I'll fix any errors with the audio. I mean, quite often you have old tape and it's starting to fall to pieces. That's the problem with this stuff. It's a mechanical thing. You run a tape through a machine and each time you play it, you'll wearing bits of it away. So it's actually not good practice to continually play these old tapes. And some of them have, on all sorts of libraries, have suffered damage over the years. So you, fortunately, by recapturing it digitally, you can get in there under the radar and quite often repair some of these problems, take out hums that have got introduced or clicks. You know, if somebody had a tape machine and the heads hadn't been demagnetized correctly, it'll put a load of clicks all over the tape. In fact, one of the tracks on one of these albums had that problem. So I had to go through forensically every couple of seconds, stop, there's a click, right, get in, draw it out. There's no other way you could do that by just playing the tape. So I always prefer to capture very high resolution digital. I'll do a vinyl specific transfer. So I'll be capturing it to the workstation as if I was cutting it. No massive compression on it to reduce the dynamic range, no crazy limiting, which is what you put on a CD to make a CD sound loud. Yeah. You know, you might have noticed modern CDs kind of blast your head off.
The loudness wars of the
exactly.
late 90s. Yeah.
Yeah, whereas, you know, if you buy a disc made 30 years ago when CD first appeared, it just sounds more like music, you know. So I'll do a transfer which is clean and then go through, fix any problems, then run that at half speed into the cutting lathe, which is a lathe I've just had restored. In fact, this is one of the this session was one of the very first things that was put through it. Oh, wow. It had only been in about a month before I was cutting these masters. So if it had come any earlier, it would have been cut on an equally good lathe, but a different one.